Section 12 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 12. And that is being young, Peter Walsh thought as he passed them. To be having an awful scene, the poor girl looked absolutely desperate, in the middle of the morning. But what was it about, he wondered. What had the young man in the overcoat been saying to her to make her look like that? What awful fix had they got themselves into, both to look so desperate as that on a fine summer morning? The amusing thing about coming back to England, after 5 years, was the way it made, anyhow, the first days, things stand out as if one had never seen them before. Lovers squabbling under a tree, the domestic family life of the parks. Never had he seen London look so enchanting. The softness of the distances, the richness, the greenness, the civilization after India, he thought, strolling across the grass. This susceptibility to impressions had been his undoing, no doubt. Still, at his age, he had, like a boy or a girl even, these alternations of mood. Good days, bad days, for no reason whatever. Happiness from a pretty face, downright misery at the sight of a frump. After India, of course, one fell in love with every woman one met. There was a freshness about them. Even the poorest dressed better than 5 years ago, surely. And to his eye, the fashions had never been so becoming. The long black cloaks, the slimness, the elegance, and then the delicious and apparently universal habit of paint. Every woman, even the most respectable, had roses blooming under glass, lips cut with a knife, curls of Indian ink. There was design, art, everywhere. A change of some sort had undoubtedly taken place. What did the young people think about? Peter Walsh asked himself. Those 5 years, 1918 to 1923, had been, he suspected, somehow very important. People looked different. Newspapers seemed different. Now, for instance, there was a man writing quite openly in one of the respectable weeklies about water closets. That you couldn't have done 10 years ago. Written quite openly about water closets in a respectable weekly. And then this taking out a stick of rouge or a powder puff and making up in public. On board ship coming home there were lots of young men and girls, Betty and Bertie he remembered in particular, carrying on quite openly. The old mother sitting and watching them with her knitting, cool as a cucumber. The girl would stand still and powder her nose in front of everyone. And they weren't engaged, just having a good time. No feelings hurt on either side. As hard as nails she was, Betty, what's her name, but a thorough good sort. She would make a very good wife at 30. She would marry when it suited her to marry some rich man and live in a large house near Manchester. Who was it now who had done that? Peter Walsh asked himself, turning into the Broad Walk. Married a rich man and lived in a large house near Manchester. Somebody who had written him a long, gushing letter quite lately about blue hydrangeas. It was seeing blue hydrangeas that made her think of him and the old days. Sally Seton, of course! It was Sally Seton, the last person in the world one would have expected to marry a rich man and live in a large house near Manchester. The wild, the daring, the romantic Sally! But of all that ancient lot, Clarissa's friends, Whitbreads, Kinderleys, Cunninghams, Kinloch-Joneses, Sally was probably the best. She tried to get hold of things by the right end anyhow. She saw through Hugh Whitbread anyhow, the admirable Hugh, when Clarissa and the rest were at his feet. "The Whitbreads!" he could hear her saying. "Who are the Whitbreads? Coal merchants, respectable tradespeople." Hugh she detested for some reason. He thought of nothing but his own appearance, she said. He ought to have been a duke. He would be certain to marry one of the royal princesses. And of course Hugh had the most extraordinary, the most natural, the most sublime respect for the British aristocracy of any human being he had ever come across. Even Clarissa had to own that. Oh, but he was such a dear, so unselfish, gave up shooting to please his old mother, remembered his aunt's birthdays, and so on. Sally, to do her justice, saw through all that. One of the things he remembered best was an argument one Sunday morning at Burton about women's rights, that antediluvian topic, when Sally suddenly lost her temper, flared up, and told Hugh that he represented all that was most detestable in British middle-class life. She told him that she considered him responsible for the state of those poor girls in Piccadilly, Hugh, the perfect gentleman. Poor Hugh. Never did a man look more horrified. She did it on purpose, she said afterwards, for they used to get together in the vegetable garden and compare notes. "He's read nothing, thought nothing, felt nothing," he could hear her saying in that very emphatic voice which carried so much farther than she knew. The stable boys had more life in them than Hugh, she said. He was a perfect specimen of the public school type, she said. No country but England could have produced him. She was really spiteful for some reason, had some grudge against him. Something had happened. He forgot what. In the smoking room. He had insulted her? Kissed her? Incredible. Nobody believed a word against Hugh, of course. Who could? Kissing Sally in the smoking room? If it had been some Honourable Edith or Lady Violet, perhaps. But not that ragamuffin Sally without a penny to her name, and a father or a mother gambling at Monte Carlo. For of all the people he had ever met, Hugh was the greatest snob. The most obsequious. No, he didn't cringe exactly. He was too much of a prig for that. A first-rate valet was the obvious comparison. Somebody who walked behind, carrying suitcases, could be trusted to send telegrams, indispensable to hostesses. And he had found his job, married his Honourable Evelyn, got some little post at court, looked after the king's cellars, polished the imperial shoe buckles, went about in knee breeches and lace ruffles. How remorseless life is! A little job at court! He had married this lady, the Honourable Evelyn, and they lived hereabouts, so he thought, looking at the pompous houses overlooking the park, for he had lunched there once in a house which had, like all Hugh's possessions, something that no other house could possibly have. Linen cupboards it might have been. You had to go and look at them. You had to spend a great deal of time always admiring whatever it was. Linen cupboards, pillowcases, old oak furniture, pictures, which Hugh had picked up for an old song. But Mrs. Hugh sometimes gave the show away. She was one of those obscure, mouse-like little women who admire big men. She was almost negligible. Then suddenly she would say something quite unexpected, something sharp. She had the relics of the grand manner, perhaps. The steam coal was a little too strong for her. It made the atmosphere thick. And so there they lived, with their linen cupboards and their old masters and their pillowcases fringed with real lace at the rate of 5,000 or 10,000 a year, presumably, while he, who was 2 years older than Hugh, cadged for a job. At 53, he had to come and ask them to put him into some secretary's office, to find him some usher's job teaching little boys Latin, at the beck and call of some mandarin in an office, something that brought in 500 a year. For if he married Daisy, even with his pension, they could never do on less. Whitbread could do it, presumably, or Dalloway. He didn't mind what he asked Dalloway. He was a thorough good sort, a bit limited, a bit thick in the head, yes, but a thorough good sort. Whatever he took up, he did in the same matter-of-fact, sensible way, without a touch of imagination, without a spark of brilliancy, but with the inexplicable niceness of his type. He ought to have been a country gentleman. He was wasted on politics. He was at his best out of doors, with horses and dogs. How good he was, for instance, when that great shaggy dog of Clarissa's got caught in a trap, and had its paw half torn off, and Clarissa turned faint, and Dalloway did the whole thing. Bandaged, made splints, told Clarissa not to be a fool. That was what she liked him for, perhaps. That was what she needed. "Now, my dear, don't be a fool. Hold this, fetch that." All the time talking to the dog as if it were a human being. But how could she swallow all that stuff about poetry? How could she let him hold forth about Shakespeare? Seriously and solemnly, Richard Dalloway got on his hind legs and said that no decent man ought to read Shakespeare's sonnets, because it was like listening at keyholes. Besides, the relationship was not one that he approved. No decent man ought to let his wife visit a deceased wife's sister. Incredible! The only thing to do was to pelt him with sugared almonds. It was at dinner. But Clarissa sucked it all in, thought it so honest of him, so independent of him. Heaven knows if she didn't think him the most original mind she'd ever met. That was one of the bonds between Sally and himself. There was a garden where they used to walk, a walled-in place, with rose bushes and giant cauliflowers. He could remember Sally tearing off a rose, stopping to exclaim at the beauty of the cabbage leaves in the moonlight. It was extraordinary how vividly it all came back to him, things he hadn't thought of for years. While she implored him, half laughing of course, to carry off Clarissa, to save her from the Hughes and the Dalloways and all the other perfect gentleman who would stifle her soul. She wrote reams of poetry in those days. Make a mere hostess of her, encourage her worldliness. But one must do Clarissa justice. She wasn't going to marry Hugh anyhow. She had a perfectly clear notion of what she wanted. Her emotions were all on the surface. Beneath, she was very shrewd, a far better judge of character than Sally, for instance, and with it all purely feminine, with that extraordinary gift, that woman's gift, of making a world of her own wherever she happened to be. She came into a room, she stood, as he had often seen her, in a doorway with lots of people round her. But it was Clarissa one remembered. Not that she was striking, not beautiful at all. There was nothing picturesque about her. She never said anything especially clever. There she was, however. There she was. No, no, no! He was not in love with her any more. He only felt, after seeing her that morning among her scissors and silks, making ready for the party, unable to get away from the thought of her. She kept coming back and back, like a sleeper jolting against him in a railway carriage, which was not being in love, of course. It was thinking of her, criticising her, starting again after 30 years, trying to explain her. The obvious thing to say of her was that she was worldly, cared too much for rank and society and getting on in the world, which was true in a sense. She had admitted it to him. You could always get her to own up if you took the trouble. She was honest. What she would say was that she hated frumps, fogies, failures, like himself presumably. Thought people had no right to slouch about with their hands in their pockets, must do something, be something. And these great swells, these duchesses, these hoary old countesses one met in her drawing-room, unspeakably remote as he felt them to be from anything that mattered a straw, stood for something real to her. Lady Bexborough, she said once, held herself upright. So did Clarissa herself. She never lounged in any sense of the word. She was straight as a dart, a little rigid, in fact. She said they had a kind of courage which the older she grew, the more she respected. In all this there was a great deal of Dalloway, of course, a great deal of the public-spirited British Empire, tariff reform, governing-class spirit, which had grown on her, as it tends to do. With twice his wits, she had to see things through his eyes, one of the tragedies of married life. With a mind of her own, she must always be quoting Richard, as if one couldn't know to a tittle what Richard thought by reading the Morning Post of a morning. These parties, for example, were all for him, or for her idea of him. To do Richard justice, he would have been happier farming in Norfolk. She made her drawing-room a sort of meeting place. She had a genius for it. Over and over again he had seen her take some raw youth, twist him, turn him, wake him up, set him going. Infinite numbers of dull people conglomerated round her, of course. But odd, unexpected people turned up. An artist sometimes a writer. Queer fish in that atmosphere. And behind it all was that network of visiting, leaving cards, being kind to people, running about with bunches of flowers, little presents. So-and-so was going to France, must have an air cushion. A real drain on her strength, all that interminable traffic that women of her sort keep up. But she did it genuinely, from a natural instinct. End of section 12. Read by Hannah Dormer, London, 17th of April 2021.